You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 12th of October. Britain could have its first Sharia zone. Figures of foreign criminals rise whilst deportations dip. More than half British households make no contribution to the state. Report from Nick Griffin, MEP, on screwed by crime syndicates of incompetent perverts. Don't shoot me, I'm Shay, an inglorious anniversary. Read Tunisian's child mag to learn how to make a Molotov cocktail. Thought for the day, mega mosque or mega bollocks up. And finally, lottery funds porn film on historic site in Kent. UK news. Britain could have its first Sharia controlled zone if plans for a mega mosque more than 4 times the size of St Paul's Cathedral get the go-ahead. The East London Mosque, to be known as the Riverine Centre, will hold 9,312 worshippers compared to 2,400 at St Paul's. The 16-acre site at West Ham will include 40-foot minarets, an Islamic library, a dining hall, multi-use game areas, tennis courts, sports facilities and 8 flats for visiting Muslim clerics. The Islamist group Tablighi Jamaat has submitted updated plans for what Cambridge-based architects NRAP are calling a contemporary Islamic sacred space, the size of Battersea Power Station. A World at 8 spokesperson commented, according to Islamic doctrine, any land claimed by Muslims is theirs in perpetuity, and this also applies to areas where Muslims live. It is in effect colonised territory. The consequences should be obvious that these areas are now de facto Sharia control zones where British law no longer applies. Over 200 foreign suspects arrested each day by the Met, but these figures saw the actual number of deportations fall. Just over 72,500, a third of the total arrested, were held by the Metropolitan Police and questioned about crimes including murder, rape, robbery and fraud. The figure is up almost a quarter on 2 years ago when 58,870 non-British suspects were arrested in London. The latest figures were revealed in a Freedom of Information request which showed 72,505 foreign suspects were arrested last year in the capital. This included 79 on suspicion of murder, 708 for rape, 1,863 for robbery, 2,801 for fraud and 2,489 for burglary. The rising trend is mirrored elsewhere, with the country's second largest force, West Midlands Police, arresting 11,801 between April 2011 and March this year. That is an increase of more than half on the previous 12 months when 7,716 foreign suspects were held. Meanwhile, the number of foreign criminals who were convicted and deported countrywide fell from 5,342 in 2010 to just 4,649 in 2011. More than half of British households make no contribution to the state because the benefits they receive outweigh their tax payments. According to a study by the Centre for Policy Studies think tank, the Treasury has over the past 30 years become dependent on a smaller and smaller proportion of taxpayers, with only the wealthiest 20% paying significantly more to the state than they receive in benefits and public services. In 2011, 53.4% of households received more in benefits and public services, such as health and education, than they paid in taxes. In 1979, the figure was 43.1%. It had grown only to 43.8% by 2001, and then accelerated as Labour's public spending boom, financed largely by borrowing, gathered pace. In the first decade of the century, the number of households dependent on the state grew by 3 million, as a rise in benefits such as tax credits and spending on schools and hospitals took growing numbers of middle-income families into dependency on the state. The think tank argues that tax payments are concentrated in the richest 20% of the families, who pay £20,125 more than they receive, and that this cannot be sustained. The authors also say it is not sustainable for the government to continue narrowing the nation's tax base while public spending and debt soar to cover the gap. The most interesting part is the astonishing expansion of dependency during the 2000s. This, of course, was the period of Labour's open doors immigration policy. A World Date writer comments, "Don't tell us that massive immigration benefits our country. It is obvious to anyone with a brain that it doesn't. In fact, it costs our country dearly." Now I hand you over to Nick Griffin MEP for his Friday report from the belly of the beast. Today he talks about us being screwed by crime syndicates of incompetent perverts as the British debt soars to 507% of GDP.
The only thing of note in Parliament this week were the preparations for the annual bout of anti-Western, pile more taxes on the poor, climate change hysteria. Over the last 2 years, these events have been held in Mexico and South Africa, in both cases well away from the nasty bits. This year it will be in Doha, Qatar, a fantastically rich Arab oil state that probably has no nasty bits at all, but which, curiously, is another exotic holiday destination. I might suggest that the great and good of the global warming establishment come to Manchester next year. After all, they surely don't attend for the sun, do they? Perish the thought. It often seems nowadays that the obsession with climate change, formerly known as global warming until our recent succession of cold winters, is a way of avoiding the real issue for the European Union. That, of course, is the continuing economic meltdown and the fact that the austerity medicine prescribed by the European Central Bank and European Stability Mechanism is actually poisoning the patient. Capital flight from Spain, for example, over the 12 months to June, reached £238 billion. That's a staggering 27% of GDP, and it's getting worse. The economic decline caused by austerity cuts will push Spain's public debt up from 84% of GDP back in April to 97% next year. The same medieval leechcraft quackery will lead to the Italian economy shrinking by over 2% this year, pushing Italy's public debt ratio up to an all-time high of 128%. That's provided the bailout that's being held up by Germany does go ahead. If it doesn't, and it's quite possible that public opinion in Germany will simply make it impossible, then a full-blown crash could lead to the whole of southern Europe contracting 7% next year. Adding other debts to that of governments, the figures are even more shocking. According to the expert Global Finance magazine, total debt, the combined figure for government, business, households and financial institutions, gives a debt-to-GDP ratio of 267% in Greece, 314% in Italy, and a ruinous 363% in Spain. In Cameron's Britain, by contrast, the figure is 507%. Yes, you heard that right. Thanks to the deadly combination of Labour and Tory mismanagement, Britain's debt-to-productivity ratio is nearly twice as bad as that of basket case Greece. 507%, of which a huge proportion is bank debt, making Britain massively vulnerable to shocks in the international banking system. Nationalists have long pointed out the folly of the trend begun by Margaret Thatcher and continued enthusiastically by New Labour, of allowing city finance to replace productive manufacturing industry as the main force within the British economy. Now the chickens are coming home to roost, except that it turns out they're vultures. No wonder the powers that be tried so desperately to get rid of us and are now racing to build a fully blown police state before it's too late. Perhaps it already is, for them. Not least because the BBC's Saville shame has the potential to spill out into a far wider paedophile and corruption scandal that could engulf and discredit and bring down the entire establishment. That's what happened in Belgium in 1996, when public disgust at the revelations that followed the Dutroux murders brought down the government. There can be little doubt that the British political elite are just as guilty and just as vulnerable. The sickening role of the BBC as a taxpayer-funded pimp for celebrity child molesters is directly related to the BBC's long war against the British National Party in general, and me in particular. The cover-up over Saville and other celebrity perverts is directly related to the BBC's driving role in the cover-up of the parallel scandal of Muslim paedophile grooming gangs, including the attempt to use Panorama as the tool with which the equally guilty men in West Yorkshire Police could try to send me to prison for speaking out about what was going on. That was not just an attack on me, or even on the British National Party. It was a calculated attempt to intimidate and silence thousands of victims, their families, and anyone else who might want to sound the alarm. What are they so scared of? Well, the whispers among political commentators and on the internet all point to the fact that BBC and police tolerance of both celebrity and Muslim paedophilia is only the tip of an iceberg of child abuse and corruption that extends throughout the entire British establishment. They didn't dare touch Saville while he was alive because of the number of prominent individuals he knew about and could take down with him. But now the truth has started to come out, the whole house of marked cards could come crashing down. Expose the BBC perverts, and they'll get their revenge by exposing Tory pederasts in the House of Commons. Name the perverts in the police and judiciary, some of whom get their victims from the Muslim gangs, and they'll hit back by exposing child-molesting Labour and Lib Dem life peers. An Olympian chain of interlocked paedophile rings runs through the British establishment. The question now is whether the elite can manipulate a damage limitation exercise that throws a few minor celebs and Pakistani taxi drivers to the outraged mob of us peasants and covers up the same sickening crimes among regular guests on programmes such as Question Time. If they fail, then it could be just another short step to widespread exposure of the related financial corruption endemic in a system in which the corporate beneficiaries of deregulation and privatisation have bought and paid for the political prostitutes who have allowed them to loot the Commonwealth of Britain. Their crimes are on a scale unseen since the Enclosure Acts and the ruthless clearances of the peasantry, which allowed the greedy great and good to steal the commons from the people of England and Wales, and the Highlands from the clans of Scotland. 1/3 of all England they stole from us then, and now they're doing it again. We are not ruled by a government of honest men and women with the safe hands needed to steer the ship of state through the coming storm of financial collapse. We are being screwed by a crime syndicate run by incompetent perverts who are heading for the rocks. Let's redouble our efforts to get our lifeboat shipshape.
Thank you, Nick. Words of wisdom indeed. We need a larger boat and all hands at the oars. Please note, not all hands on the hawse. World News. 45 years ago this week, Ernesto Che Guevara got a major dose of his own medicine. Without trial, he was declared a murderer, stood against a wall and shot. If the saying "what goes around comes around" ever fit, it's there. When you saw the beaming look on Che's face as his victims were tied to the stake and blasted apart by the firing squad, said a former Cuban political prisoner to this writer, you saw there was something seriously wrong with Che Guevara. As commander of the La Cabana execution yard, Che often shattered the skull of the condemned man, or boy, by firing the coup de grace himself. When other duties tore him away from his beloved execution yard, he consoled himself by viewing the slaughter, and in fact in his second-story office in La Cabana he had a section of wall torn out so that he could watch his darling firing squads at work. Even as a youth, Ernesto Guevara's writings revealed a serious mental illness. My nostrils dilate while savouring the acrid odour of gunpowder and blood. Crazy with fury, I will stain my rifle red while slaughtering any vencido that falls in my hands. With the deaths of my enemies I prepare my being for the sacred fight and join the triumphant proletariat with a bestial howl. This passage is from Ernesto Guevara's famous motorcycle diaries, though Robert Redford somehow overlooked it while producing his heartwarming movie. The world seems to prefer communist murderers to fascist ones. A Tunisian children's magazine, Cause Cousar, Rainbow, has recently published a detailed step-by-step instruction of how to make a Molotov cocktail. Now, the periodical is facing a lawsuit for endangering kids' lives, according to various media reports. The Tunisian Ministry for Women and Family Affairs has expressed concern that the article's content poses a threat to children's lives, as it encourages the use of Molotov cocktails in acts of vandalism or terrorism. Published under the Knowledge Corner of the popular magazine, the article contained detailed instructions using colourful illustrations to demonstrate methods of assembly. The magazine, which has decades-long history, is very popular in Tunisia and is mostly read by boys and girls aged 5 to 15, and it never had any political orientation. The article touched a raw nerve in a country still seeking to control the chaos and popular unrest stirred by last year's successful revolution, the first of the Arab Spring, which forced former Tunisian President Zayn al-Abidine bin Ali to flee the country. A World Date commentator said, "We had the Arab Spring, the Arab Summer, and the Arab Autumn is here, and it will be followed by the Islamic Winter. The light of the West is slowly being snuffed out in these countries. God help the minorities, especially Christian ones, because Islam will not." Thought for the day: mega mosque or a load of bollocks? Well, I'm quite sure that you have heard about the new possible, or rather probable, mega mosque to be erected on our fair land. I will bet the vast majority of non-BNP members will just shrug their shoulders à la française and say, well, it's too late, isn't it? What can we do? And with attitude like that, absolutely nothing. We need petitions, objections and marches, and I mean marches. The sort of marches the Muslims do when somebody or everybody has offended them, which is pretty much all of the time. Thousands of us beleaguered and humble people to silently just stand there in protest. That has more effect than all the shouting and placard waving. Sheer numbers and good manners win at all times. Ever seen a mob out of control? Not a pretty or invigorating sight, and certainly does no one group or ideal any good at all. Besides, the police will just have to stand there without arresting nationalists, which seems to be their bread and butter. This report reached me yesterday from our reporter in Europe. Monday, the 8th of October, in the market of Chemin-Basse d'Avignon in Nîmes, Muslims threatened wine sellers, a butcher who sells pork, as well as vendors who sell light clothing, and banned them from coming back on pain of death. Already a few months ago, a pork butcher disappeared. He just shut up shop and left, even though he had lots of clients. No one understood why, according to a resident of that district. In June, the market's commercial arcade was totally burned, and the inhabitants of the district created a collective to complain about the rise in violence from young Muslims, without anything effective having been done about it by the local government. According to the local press, these things are being done by a minority of Muslims. A local reporter commented despairingly, "The good coexistence has failed. The integration has failed. The chance for France has turned into a curse. The all-conquering Islam advances, the leaders of France and the do-gooders profit in a stealthy manner." Here she was referring to the fact that Muslims vote socialist and that they are supported by anti-fascists and the local functionaries. So much like here then, people disappearing. How much would you bet that the missing pork butcher ended up in a kebab as well? There is another little gem from a source in Kent who has a family near Preston, Lancashire, which of course is now no man's land. There is an 80-year-old lady whose family has lived in that area for generations. She is a gentle soul who looks after stray and abused animals. This is what she has to endure on her daily walks or shopping. Muslim youths who yell at her, "Christian bitch, I spit on you, take that animal away," referring to man's best friend. Do you see a marked resemblance to the SS and the baiting of Jews in their ghettos? The Hitler Youth and their closing down and threatening of Jewish-owned shops? Do you really? Well, I do, and the only difference is that the SS and the Hitler Youth were in their own country doing horrible things, not in Israel, which is occupied mainly by the Jewish people. Now that is the basis of my anti-Islamic rants. They are not in their own country. They may buy up our land and our governments, but they are outsiders, and as far as I'm concerned, I do not care if they've managed to stay and breed a couple of generations of their vile progeny on this country. They are still not welcome in England. Their mosques are not welcome. Their awful halal food is not welcome. Their clothing is not welcome, and in fact promotes the very antithesis of their possible integration. Their schools and Islamic centres are architectural nightmares, and in fact Islam is a total nightmare to Western civilization. Go to any Muslim country apart from Dubai, which is founded on immense oil wealth, international sponsors and poor Indian workers, and you'll find the third world in all its glory in the name of Allah. We live in a socialist country, and Muslims will jump on any bandwagon to reach the top of the dung heap, and at the moment it is going the way of communism. Anti-church, anti-Jewish, anti-right-wing, anti-democracy and anti-British, except when it comes to calling themselves British to get benefits. They are not British and they are not welcome, any of them at any time. They are an offence to nature, and progress and other religions, whatever they may be. In short, the attitude of the Muslim in the street sucks. They have become cocky and think themselves unstoppable. Who said pride goes before a fall? Beware waking the English lion, its bite may be worse than its bark. I hope for the sake of that little old lady and us that this is so. And finally, thanks to a lottery grant of £50,000 which enabled Fort Amherst in Chatham, Kent to reopen, this historic site has also played host to a pornographic movie, which was filmed at the 18th century site just weeks after opening. Trustees of Britain's best surviving Napoleonic fortress are furious that the filming was allowed to go ahead. The film was shot by Playboy TV and called Tight Rider, a spoof of the 80s hit series Knight Rider, only this starred Michael Tight and Slovakian porn star Natalie D'Angelo, who has starred in more than 100 porno movies. Filmmakers paid more than £1,000 to hire the venue, and the film was shown this week on the pay-per-view adult channel, attracting an audience of several thousand people. Was Knight Rider ever this popular? You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend.